Now I want to talk about fence sitters, and it always seems to be a hot topic on the channel, and I think there's a lot of misunderstandings out there about it. There are some clear, definite rules when it comes to fence sitting or being a fence sitter or working with fence sitters that are on your neighbor's property. I think there's some clear rules and some clear boundaries that can be set to where everyone gets along, even if you have that person on your border. And that's the biggest thing, is to get along with your neighbors. But that goes both ways. I think some look at it like, well, we want to be nice to everybody, but it has to go both ways, and that's where it gets more strict as you move on. I want to define what a fence sitter is. There's a couple different types of variations of fence sitters. There's one where you're trying to maximize your borders and the amount of core area you can devote to deer. You have 40 acres. You have that ability to access on your borders. You're doing so, and then you're hunting inward. What that means is you can develop a core area that's 25, 26, the most 30 acres on the inside of that property, where you can keep your scent out of it, hopefully your sound, your sight. That allows you to maximize the number of acres. Let's face it, there's a lot of properties out there with a couple interior roads going to a couple stand locations towards the borders. You're accessing through the middle and going out, and you're getting to the borders of your property. You're moving through there, utilizing to where you get on that stand. It might be good for the wind, but getting there, you blew out a third of your property or half of the property. It only takes a weekend of hunting 3 or 4 stands like that, and your property is ruined. You have 0 acres that are part of a core sanctuary. A lot of people use sanctuary, and that term is overused and abused. A sanctuary is not 10 acres. You say, okay, this is on my property and I'm not going in there. And then you drive along it. Deer can see you from the inside and deer can hear you. That's not a sanctuary. Your sanctuary should also include your food plots. And so when you're maximizing that acreage, that's where you can develop 30 to 40 acre core, and maybe your cabin's in the middle. You start out in the evening, you go down a driveway, you can still maximize 18, 20, 22 acres that are all deer all the time, because when you access your stands, you're blowing your scent to the outside of that core area. When you're returning to the cabin, to your vehicle, you're also walking through where the deer aren't. You actually have bedding areas, so you can walk through those after dark. You actually have bedding areas you can get behind in the morning, and you can hunt those evening food sources. So you're trying to maximize your property. That's where you have that small property. It could be 10 acres, could be even 70. You're walking along that border, and then you're hunting inward. You might be 20 yards from your line, but you're hunting your land, not your neighbors, because that's a huge difference than the traditional fence sitter that you see in a lot of the upper Midwest, where there's a lot of hunters. For example, I'm willing to bet that out of the 26 states that I've been to, a lot of those, very frequently, the #1 fence sitting state is probably Michigan, and that's related to hunter numbers. I would say Pennsylvania is right up there too. Ohio, in some of those areas where there's not a lot of cover and a lot of hunters are forced into small locations, a lot of hunters, near the cities more. That can take place in portions of northern Indiana, even northern Illinois, certainly a lot of Minnesota too, Wisconsin. But you get into those higher hunter number states, and a lot of people are pressing the line, and that fence sitter is the one that a lot of people have problems with, where they have a stand on your line facing into your land, and they're obviously hunting your property. Now I'm all for, and this is a different topic in itself, I think we're shooting today, but how to work with neighbors to retrieve deer, and looking at those deer retrievals and saying, for example, I allow my neighbors to retrieve deer on my land, and I have a few rules. And that means that if they were sitting on the fence and they're shooting the deer on the property or setting themselves up for a problem, then I probably wouldn't let them go get it. On the flip side, like we all do, we make a bad shot, goes on to the neighbors, goes onto my property. They inform me first. They allow me the opportunity to go out with them if I want to. They go in when I want them to, which means after dark most of the time, unless we're done hunting, and we don't care if they go in there to daylight. But I'm going to find out where it was shot, where it crossed the border, and I'm going to go with them at that time. I don't have a problem with that. In fact, I'd bring the tractor out or bring the ATV, UTV, whatever, and help them get it out, help them track it. Did that with a previous land that we hunted over in Wisconsin, where the neighbor shot one, and it ruined up the last half of the day. It went on the property I hunt. I went and helped them drag it, get it under the fence for them, and track it. And I've done that many times, public land neighbors, private land neighbors, and so that's always the best way. However, if people are setting themselves up for the problem, if they're taking advantage of the situation, that's where it starts to get ugly. And that's what happens with fence sitters, where there's people that are in a negative connotation with that word. They're actually coming through their land, sitting on your fence, hunting your property, shooting a deer, and then it repeatedly goes on your property. because they're hunting your land. You know, they might even have field edge. I've dealt with a lot of that where they have fields, they have no woods. And so they're sitting on the edge of the field and literally when they shoot a deer, it's going to run into your land. Those are the kind of problems you want to combat because people take advantage of people all the time. And that's running into fence sitters where they're specifically hunting your land, facing their stands into your land. That's where it becomes a big problem. Because I've had people and I've had clients, they'll say, well, I'm going to give them 50 yards. And I'll go around that person because I don't want to ruin their hunt. Well, if you have 30 acres, you just gave your friend on the neighbor there, even if you just go around by 50 yards, 55 yards, right around there, you just gave them 5 acres of your land. If you only own 30, just start dividing it out. How much your taxes are, how much you pay for those acres, how much was it per acre for those 5 acres? Do you really want to give up that land to your neighbor so that they can hunt it? I've even said, I've seen people in comments, they'll say, well, I just like to do it both ways. You know, I'm doing that for my neighbor, they're doing that for me. Well, then at that time, if you're hunting their property, you never know where they're going to be there when they're going to walk through there. So they have more control over how you hunt on that border edge. And that's why I like doing what I do is if you are using the borders, which I do, then I want to use the border and then turn inward and hunt my own land. And that's maximizing mine. And then if my neighbor comes in 50 yards away, 60 yards away, because I'm hunting with the winds in my favor, it's not going to bother me that much if he comes in there. But if I'm planning on hunting his land and they show up, then they have a lot of control over your property. Now, if you're looking at it as an equal exchange, I have 40 acres, they have 40 acres, we're going to do this. You're going to lack control. You're going to have a harder time hunting. Maybe get along with your neighbor just the same, but there's really no clear boundaries. How much land did they get to hunt of yours? How much land do you get to hunt of theirs? It creates a lot of problems. It creates animosity and resentment out throughout the years, especially if one is a better hunter than the other. It doesn't work. Now, at the same time, what if you have 10 acres? I've seen guys say, yeah, I think I should be able to hunt my neighbor's borders. They can hunt mine. Well, the neighbor might have 400 acres. You have 10 to hunt. You're facing into their land. They don't want to face into your land because you only have 10 acres and you're not holding a lot of deer on that 10 acres. And so, you know, what do you call it? An equal exchange for value, for back and forth, on hunting each other's neighbors. What I found with fence sitters, whether they're turning inward, they're maximizing their core area and trying to hold as many deer on their small parcel or large parcel as they can, or they're that fence sitter that's specifically going through their land to hunt yours. I found that clear boundaries and borders are key. And I'll give you an example. To me, you know, people say, oh, my neighbor can come in and, you know, they let them track deer whenever they want. They let them send on the fence, face into their property. Well, pretty soon that person is all over your property. It's no different than, yeah, you can go get your dog out of my yard. And they do that repeatedly. That's no problem. The dog runs over, they come grab it, they get it out. But all of a sudden you come back from vacation, they're using your deck. You come back again, they're using your grill on your deck. That's what fence sitters are. They continually take more and more. Instead, have clear borders, clear boundaries, clear talk on when they can retrieve deer, when they can't retrieve deer. You're the one that's in command of this. And if they're doing something that actually infringes on your use of the property and could potentially harm you because they're shooting, they're running onto your property, certainly by all means really put your foot down and be strict about it. And that's why going back, relationships with even countries, when there are clear borders and boundaries, there's not much problem. Have you heard much problem about Canada and the US right now? There's not much border crossing. I don't get political much, but we're just looking at the facts. There's a mess down in Mexico, US border. There's not a mess on the US-Canada border. What's the difference, folks? Seriously. They have clear borders. Canada, US, not clear at all. Down in Mexico and the US border down there. Think about that as it applies to your property. When there's not clear boundaries for kids, for neighbors, for competing countries, for neighboring countries, there's problems. Doesn't matter if it's in your house, in your yards, or on your deer hunting property. And I hope that makes a lot of sense because fence sitters, good or bad, can end up taking advantage of a situation. And it might be that you're taking advantage of your own situation. You want to maximize those core areas. You're walking on your fence line, you're facing inward, you're hunting, no problem with that. Not every fence sitter is created equal. Not every relationship with a neighbor is created equal. But bottom line, if you effectively establish clear boundaries, borders, in the end, what's pretty cool is all of a sudden you're asking, hey, can I go track my deer on your land? They say yes. Then they're asking you, hey, can I track my deer on your land? You say yes. You might even help them. That's what builds neighborly relationships. It's not building resentment, it's just following the rules, working together for the common good, and actually reciprocating that permission and show of good neighborly. To me, being a good neighbor isn't, hey, come into my garage and yard and anytime you want and use it. It's actually establishing these boundaries, being good neighbors, and building a good relationship over time, because the neighbors can see that you're going to help them as much as they're helping you, and that creates better relationships in the long term. And think of fence sitting as an opportunity to get to know your neighbors a lot more in a good way. And again, if they're taking advantage of you, which is a small percentage of most landowners, I can definitely say that. But what I found is if you don't put your foot down, it's only going to get worse. Put your foot down. Don't let resentment build up. Enjoy your neighbors and build a long-term relationship, and we'll all, as hunters, be better off for it in the future. Hey guys, I really appreciate you watching today's video. We're out here having some fun today. We're planting some switchgrass, cutting some timber, making some bedding areas, but most importantly, we're putting it all together, and that's critical. Any habitat improvements that you're making, you can't just make improvements because it's a good spot. You have to link those together so that helps your hunt this fall. Really, I encourage you to check out my web classes. The link is in the description. It's helped a lot of folks design their properties and do what we're out here having fun doing right now.